Welcome to Pensar Basketball, and today we're talking about the three player types that the Raptors must replace this offseason. I've used the graphic of three players who kind of fit the bill, but who may not be really available this offseason, including OG Anunoby, Christian Coloco, and Norman Powell, who Raptor fans should be very familiar with. I like to think of players in terms of player types, but before I start this live, I really want to address this. I couldn't help but notice that as I was watching TSN, a familiar troll walked onto my screen and was talking a lot about how the Raptors put themselves in this precarious situation trading for Jakob Pertl, and oh my god, I can't believe that they did this. And it's like these guys don't think the internet exists or something. I keep getting tired of people doing this, and so, like, can we please just be real about this? Most people supported that trade when it happened, right? Most Raptor fans outside of this community supported that trade. And now we are living in the remnants of, what has happened since that trade. But can we please stop acting like Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster were the only idiots in the whole world that thought trading Jakob Pertl to save that season was a good idea? Trading for Jakob Pertl? Because I seem to remember a lot of Raptor analysts, and I remember their takes because at the time I was vehemently against it. I made many, many videos, many lives, took a lot of shit, got a lot of unsubscribers for it. I remember those takes because I remembered them for a reason. I remembered them because I knew one day these people would try to walk back from it. I knew when this whole Jakob Pertl thing would blow up in their face, that people would be like, oh, well, it was a good idea. It probably wasn't such a great idea. Yeah, but you said it was. And I don't appreciate necessarily this idea of coming on and just absolving yourself. Like at the very least, just mention it and be like, hey, we thought it was a good idea at the time. Just drop that in there so people aren't coming on and maybe unaware of your takes in the past. Anyways, let's move on. Enough of Josh Lewinberg. I think he's taken enough of my mental energy for one day. The three player types. Look, the Raptors have really, really prided themselves on this notion of flexibility. Do they have real flexibility? Yes, I'm here to tell you they have very real flexibility this offseason. And that flexibility starts tomorrow. Really, how much flexibility they will have and what type of flexibility they will have will be determined tomorrow. But basically, they have certain staples on their roster that expect to be there next season. There's 6 players that I'm confident will be back as Toronto Raptors next season. You can go as far as 7. Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and Grady Dick are pretty much non-negotiables, right? Kelly Olynyk is probably also a non-negotiable. That's 5, okay? You probably throw in Ochai Agbaji just because they just traded for him, and Jakob Pertl in there as well, okay? They're probably expecting most of those guys to play rotation minutes. So it's not like you have a hell of a lot of wiggle room here to just reinvent yourself. Where those guys are in the pecking order also can't be too reimagined, because it's not like RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley are suddenly going to become bench players if you manage to upgrade their positions. So there's a certain expectation that Jakob Pertl is probably your starting center until further notice, and Scotty, Emmanuel Quickley, and RJ Barrett are probably starters. I mean, Scotty is definitely a starter, but the other two are almost certainly going to be starters. You're not negotiating with Emmanuel Quickley and paying him $28 million to come off your bench. So basically, that's where we're at. 4 starters are keyed. And that's a big problem when you think about it, because there's a lot of people out there who feel like this team doesn't have enough talent with those 4 guys. That the 5th guy would basically have to be like Anthony Davis for this team to have a chance. And I'm here to tell you that doesn't need to be the case at all. I think RJ, Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, and Jakob Pertl is a very formidable 4-man unit. I don't think it's the best team in the league, but I think it's a play-in team. I think it's a very low playoff team if that 5th player is good and there's enough depth around them. So really what I'm talking about is what this team is lacking more than anything and how to fix it. So really the 3 player types will be put into this rotation in some way. It could be a 5th starter, right? One of these players could be a 5th starter. One of these players could be a 6th man. Kelly Olynyk is not at a stage in his career where he's guaranteed 25 minutes. So we're talking about a 6th man, a 5th starter, and maybe even an 8th player off the bench, like a high-level rotation player. Those are the three players, right? This is one way to go, and it would certainly shore up a lot of these needs in one go. And that would be probably outside of what I'm willing to talk about today. Because I'm not talking about dream scenarios in which you trade 3 first round picks for Donovan Mitchell or 4 first round picks for Lauri Markkanen. I'm not talking about that. I'm also not talking about crazy hypotheticals like you get the first overall pick and you trade it for, Lauri Markkanen. I'm not talking about that either. What I'm talking about are realistic ideas which go down to the fundamentals of how basketball is played. So let's talk about the very first and probably the most crucial player type, and that is the athletic, transition friendly rim protector. If he can shoot, all the better. But even if he can't shoot, I'm okay with it. Okay. Think about this player as Derek Lively. I think that's one type of that you can go that way. You can think of Clint Capella. Maybe you can think of a very young Serge Ibaka. And they were very, very, very young. Okay, you think Christian Koloko plus, like maybe a exaggerated first round talent version of Christian Koloko, like a better version of Christian Koloko, if you will. Basically, what you need from this player is activity and disruption. Watching Derek Lively and watching Daniel Gafford and just watching athletic bigs and seeing the impact that they have, even watching Chet, watching Wemby. I'm not saying you're getting Chet and Wemby in this draft, but Chet and Wemby are not just special because they're extremely disruptive rim protectors. That's part of it. That's part of the charm. They are incredible because they have the two-way potential. We're not talking about the ball skills of a Victor Wembanyama or a Chet Holmgren. I'm just talking about like 50% of what they do athletically in terms of how much pressure they put on the other big and how much pressure they put on the other team and how much pressure they put on the paint and how they can be unlocked in a pick and roll game, right? The Raptors like to run. With Scotty, you're going to run fast, right? With Grady, you're going to have a little bit of space. But there are multiple ways to get space. Well, obviously, you can get it through great talent, like Kyrie Irving creates space by virtue of being on the court. You can get it through great shooting, like Grady Dick creates space by extending the gaps between the players and how close defenders have to be to him to get out to his shot. Shaquille O'Neal created space. So there's different ways to create space. But one of those ways to create space is through speed. And speed is most valuable at the big spot. Having a big who is super fast offensively, who can run the floor like a gazelle, is really valuable, especially in a high-paced transition offense. So one player that would fit this bill very much is a Jonathan Isaac. In terms of like ready-made talents around the league, that's one player who could really fit into this big rim protector who runs the court. But there are injury issues. But hey, the draft, take a look at this graphic that I put up earlier. I mean, the draft has a lot of guys that I would, where the hell is it? What? Didn't I just, oh, right. My bad. Hold on. Let me pull it up. I was like, where is that? Here. So if you remember this graphic from earlier, that was the guards. Yeah. I mean, here you go. From Alex Sarr, right, to Yves Missy, to Khalil Ware. Like, there's a lot of guys who fit this mold of transition offensive player. And again, if that player is your eighth guy off the bench and they're just in for like 15 minutes a night just to create a little bit of havoc and maybe block a couple of shots, it's not really going to cost you very much. But you haven't really had this player on your roster other than Christian Koloko. This player has been absolutely missing from your roster for years, okay? In fact, even during your championship run, you didn't quite have this player. You had some version of it with Serge Ibaka, but he was a little bit older. This active, speedy, faster than average, very athletic, very bouncy, lob target type of big, it would be a joy for RJ to play with and Scotty especially to play with. Scotty's never had this type of player. So I think this is one type of player the Raptors must target. Is it going to be Nick Claxton, as a free agent signing? I don't know. Is it going to be a draft pick? I don't know. Would they spend the 6th overall pick on this player? I don't know. Is that player even available, the 6th overall pick? I don't know. Okay. But what I'm saying is, to some extent, this player must be developed. The second player type, probably the hardest because it's so valuable, is the point of attack defender who can shoot. Um, you don't need a lot from this player. Like, you don't need super high volume. I think I would settle for something like Isaac Okoro, but maybe like a better version of it, and Aaron Nesmith, but like a better version of it. You need this player. It probably isn't going to be your other starter, but maybe it is. If you can get really high end with this, if you can put a lot of chips in the bag, maybe you're talking about a Herb Jones. Maybe you're talking about a Trey Murphy, in which case that player will be the fifth starter. You need this type of player in the worst way, largely because I believe that this is the type of player who can really unlock your defense. The pressure that you create at the point of attack is like the pressure you can create at the rim, with your rim protectors like Jakob Pertl and whatever, is only as good as the guidance that player is going to get from the point of attack defense. You can't expect Jakob Pertl to clean up 85 mistakes a possession. You just can't. So you need competent rim protection, and which you will have a little bit with Jakob Pertl and potentially this other player that I'm talking about, and maybe a little bit even with Kelly Olynyk, maybe a little bit also with Scotty Barnes, who is a capable shot blocker and has proven to be disruptive at the rim. You have some of it. You certainly have some of it. Now what you need is someone to kind of slow the bleeding on the perimeter. Is it going to be Ochai Agbaji? I don't think so. But if he develops into it, great. Wonderful. I don't think so. So who is that player going to be? Could it be Zachary Ricochet? Could it be that player? I don't know. Could it be Stephon Castle? I don't know. But you're going to have to find that player type. And depending on how ready they are, they're going to have to play a lot of minutes, because this is a team that is pretty defensively compromised across the board. Scotty's a good defender. He's not Evan Mobley defensively. He's not Jaren Jackson. He's a really good defender, though. But other than him in that starting lineup and Jakob Pertl, there is no other good defender. Gary Trent Jr. is not a good defender if he's back. RJ Barrett's not a good defender. Emmanuel Quickley is an okay defender. If you put 4 good defenders around him, he's pretty good. Okay? So he can stick. He can stick to a scheme. He can bother a little bit. He can operate within it. I think RJ Barrett is also going to be a little bit better if you can put better defenders around him. But this player is going to have to do some really heavy lifting, especially when you start to get onto like really tough isolation scorers. The ability to be able to throw OG on Anthony Edwards one night and throw him on Jokic the next night. This is a luxury that the Raptors really, I don't know if they ever really completely fully appreciated what they had in him. It'd be great to get him back. That'd be a great use of $35 to $40 million of cap space. Maybe some Raptor fans don't agree. I think he'd be great. But barring getting OG back, really what you need is somebody who can do a little bit of what he did. It doesn't have to be nearly as multi-positional. Maybe it doesn't have to be a guy who can guard 1 through 5 like OG, but just a guy who can guard 2 through 4. That's a pretty hard thing to find. I think you're probably going to have to trade for this player. I don't know how you're going to trade for this player. I'm betting that player probably plays for the New Orleans Pelicans right now. Maybe you have to develop that player. Maybe you have to trade for a guy who has the potential to become that player, and then you get that player through development, like a Dyson Daniels. Or maybe you have to leverage multiple first-round picks to get that player now, like a Trey Murphy III. I don't know. But the point is, you really, really need that point of attack defender on the wing. Okay. The third thing you desperately need is a guard who can create off the bounce and put pressure on the rim. This is a big reason I've been such a huge proponent of Nikola Topic, because he is that player. Stephon Castle might become that player. Ron Holland might become that player. There are several guys in this draft who have the potential to become that type of player, like an attack guard. Again, to go back to this video, I believe it was this graphic, so it was this. And it's not necessarily Modest Buzelis, but you get the idea, right? You need a guy who can run a pick and roll. I think Rob Dillingham could maybe, maybe not rim pressure, but just pressure in the middle of the floor. Norman Powell is a great example of a guy who gets all the way to the cup and puts a lot of pressure on the rim. I think RJ Barrett does some of this. I think Emmanuel quickly can do more of this. I think Scotty can do more of this. But at some point, you need some of this coming off your bench. You need a really capable guard coming off your bench. And it doesn't have to be a point guard because Kelly Olynyk and Jakob Pertl and Scotty Barnes and, these guys are very capable ball handlers and playmakers. So you have an abundance of playmaking on this team, which is good. What you don't have is an abundance of shot creation and play finishing, which is what I'm trying to accomplish with these three player types. So it doesn't have to be a traditional point guard. It really doesn't. It can be a combo guard. It can be a relentless attacking combo guard like a Norman Powell. It could also be, a point guard. It could also be a bit of a bigger wing, just someone who puts a constant pressure on teams in the pick and roll, someone who can get downhill, someone who can get into the middle of the floor, someone who finishes well at the rim. So none of these players sound like Gary Trent Jr. to me. Okay. And that is sort of the bigger nutshell here, right? It's really difficult when you are a team that is lacking something to lose more of that. It would be like if you were in the desert and you were thirsty and I asked you for a cup of water. No, you're not getting it. And that's kind of what it feels like to have Gary Trent Jr. on this team, which is like it's necessity is the mother of invention, or it feels to me that the Raptors fans and the Raptors themselves perhaps have sold themselves into this idea that they just simply don't have shooters. And because they don't have shooters, they could never afford to lose one of the best ones that they have. But consider how shots are created and how much more effective or less effective your shooters are based on how much pressure you put on the rim. And I think you'll start to see shooting as less than a composite of putting a whole bunch of people who have good forms on the court together. So, for instance, a good example would be, could 5 Klay Thompsons be a really good shooting team? Probably not, right? Steph Curry requires a player like Draymond Green or a player like Kevon Looney to unlock his shooting. And it's not to say that he would absolutely not be able to shoot without those guys. He's the greatest shooter of all time. But his shooting is unlocked by the things around him. When you have guys like Norman Powell, even if they themselves cannot shoot very well, I mean, Norman Powell's a pretty hell of a great shooter. But I'm saying even if your version of Norman Powell was just a guy who just put pressure in the middle of the rim and, just got relentless attacks at the rim and was just like a guy who was just dynamic with the basketball and didn't shoot very well. So like a Nikola Topic, like people say he doesn't shoot very well. Well, he's shooting like, 85 plus percent from the free throw line across 3 years. I think that should matter to people. But nevertheless, people want to say he can't shoot. Fine. But he will find shooters. He will create shooting. And that is important. Scotty Barnes can be a better shooter. He will be a better shooter if he had better creators around him. I promise you. This has been proven over and over. There are guys who are really great shooters. Like, for instance, like why do all our shooters struggle? Like I find this kind of hilarious. We have so many examples of this. Jalen McDaniels shot 40% for Philly last year, granted on pretty small volume. What did he shoot for us? I dare you to Google it. You try not to. I hope you don't have coffee in your mouth and you're sitting down when you Google Jalen McDaniels shooting percentages this year. There are a lot of players, in my opinion, who shoot worse than they can or worse than they could with the Raptors. And, Yuta Watanabe is another example. Aaron Baines. Like, this is going back pretty long. This is going back 4 or 5 years now. It's not conspiracy. It's just you lack shot creation. Fred VanVleet he's not the shot creator that Luka Doncic is. And when you have a Luka Doncic, you're going to have unique opportunities that are going to open up. Now, Luka is not the only guy who can do this. So my idea of this would be a Malik Monk. This would be a dream, right? A Malik Monk would be a dream. But this is the type of player we're talking about. A guy who can get into the middle of the floor, really elite in transition, and a player who just puts relentless pressure on the rim. And he's one of the top 5, top 6 half-court playmakers in the league. He really has a superstar skill set there. He's not a superstar. He's not even a star. He's never going to be an all-star. But he has a superstar skill set, which teams have to respect, And were it not for an injury, he would have been going away the sixth man of the year this past year. So he's proven that he can do it off the bench. The upgrade of Gary Trent Jr. to Malik Monk is so huge. Even if the points per game or whatever, or the shooting is not that huge to you, the player type and how it fits and what it does for the other players is so important. It is important to me that all three of these players be reasonably intelligent basketball players. Make no mistake about it. We're not trying to sign dummies here. But it is not super important to me that they be young, that they be old. I don't really care. Okay. Not trying to sign 36-year-olds here. We're not trying to sign Thaddeus Young. Fine. But to some extent, I just want to see these player archetypes in place because it is going to allow the other players on your team to function properly. So for the longest time, it felt like the Raptors, you know, in their infinite wisdom and their genius, had sort of just abandoned this idea of player archetypes. And they just wanted every player to be one archetype. And it was like a really weird experiment in which they thought to themselves, if every single player is a 6'8" wing big or a big wing, could it all work? And it reminds me of what I just said about Klay Thompson. 5 Klay Thompsons is not a great shooting team. Well, same reason that Precious Achua, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and Pascal Siakam are going to struggle to score because none of them can create at an elite enough level. None of them have the shot creation, finishing ability, and the perimeter. It just doesn't work. If at some point, I'm so glad the Raptors figured this out. I think they might have gone too far now because now they've gone too far in the other direction. But now you need to get some of it back. So it's like a constant tinkering process, right? We started the year with OG, Precious, Scotty, Pascal, like all of these 6'9" guys, right? Jalen McDaniels, you added that guy to that. Wow. And you're just thinking to yourself, like, wow, like the defensive potential of this team is so immense because they have all these long, rangy guys with huge wingspans. But then also, like, you just don't have like the player types that you need. You know what I mean? So now you've diversified the player type on your roster. You have much like to think of this an example, like a really good example of this. I read a meme the other day, which really made me think of this. They said every successful sitcom has an orange shaped man and a banana shaped man. And then they flash to Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street and flash to Jerry Seinfeld and George Costanza on Seinfeld. There's a contrast that is required on player types. And that's what I'm saying. I'm looking at this team. I'm seeing player archetypes that are emerging, right? In Emmanuel Quickly, you have this jitter quick, maybe not super quick, but very quick guard who can get downhill, who can shoot deep range, right? It's replacing a little bit of what you had with Fred VanVleet in terms of the spacing elements, right? With Grady Dick, you have an evolving movement shooter. You really haven't had that on your roster in a few years. And so I do think it's a different archetype than what you're used to. So we saw this immediately last year. RJ Barrett, with all his similarities to, I think, Pascal Siakam in terms of sometimes how they score, barreling to the basket, and some of their strengths and weaknesses, by rounding him out as a player, you are actually turning him into an archetype of a player that you haven't had in a while, right? He is a little bit like Norman Powell in a way, right? So you're getting a little bit of different. Kelly Olynyk, a stretch big. Who knew? A big who can shoot, right? A big who can actually shoot and defend a little and play make from the mid post and whatever, and provide a little bit of spacing for all your attackers. That's good. Jakob Poeltl, an actual center, a drop big who rebounds and is good on the offensive glass and is efficient with the basketball and, is a good passer and can probably play 20 to 23 minutes a night for you as a hub. Good stuff. Okay, so you have all these different pieces and it's great. It's wonderful. And Scotty, you have this really big wing who can, he can probably play point guard in a pinch and center in a pinch. So you retain the best of your switch everything, super long wings. And now you've put all these interesting pieces around him, but now it's time to get some of that length back. So what I would love is if all three of these players were also big for their position. So a point of attack defender who's maybe not 6'4" like Ochai Agbaji, but actually closer to 6'7" or 6'8". So you start to get some of that size back, right? Like you want a big, like a transition big, who can run, who can run up and down the court and put some pressure on the other team. But maybe instead of a guy who's 6'8", maybe you want a guy who's about 7'1", or 7 feet tall. And it's the same thing with that, attack guard, right? It's just about sizing up the average. Everything's about averages, right? How big are you across the board? The Raptors have gotten a little bit small, a little too small for my taste, right? I think it's time to get bigger again because the league is going bigger. So with your point guard, with your backup guard that I was talking about, I'm really praying for lottery luck tomorrow. I know that I've maintained pretty much the entire offseason that I'm very indifferent, but I'm really starting to really warm up to this idea of Nikola Topic being our pick. And if we get a top 4 pick, that could actually happen. If he doesn't go top 1, 2, it could happen. So if we do get a top 2, top 3 pick, that's going to be probably my guy until something changes. And it's largely because he is 6'6" and he can do what he can do with the basketball. He's a maestro with the basketball. And because it makes you bigger, you start edging up that advantage. So you get a Topic, maybe lucky. Like if you get luck out in the draft, you get him. Maybe you trade Bruce Brown, who's a little bit undersized, right? Bruce Brown doesn't fit any of these archetypes that I just mentioned, right? If he could defend the way he was, reported to be able to defend a couple of years ago, then maybe he fits the point of attack defender type. But he's not really fitting into a box here. He's not a super athletic wing. He's not a super, dynamic guard who puts a lot of pressure in the middle of the rim. He's like a utility forward. He's like a do-it-all player who plays off of superstars. You don't have superstars here yet. So not really, fully understanding how he fits. I'm not really understanding how Jalen McDaniels fits. I'm not really understanding how Chris Boucher fits in all of this. I mean, in theory, Chris Boucher can plug in to what we're talking about if he was maybe a little bit more consistent offensively and a little bit bigger defensively, like a little better and a little bigger. I know he gets these crazy hustle blocks, and I know that, he can run the floor like a gazelle, but I just feel like the force of him is somewhat like the athletic tools and potential of him is somewhat undone by the inconsistency and the lack of IQ of him sometimes. So moving off of Bruce Brown, moving off of a guy like that, moving off of potentially Chris Boucher, moving off of a Jalen McDaniels, guys who really don't fit, maybe moving off of Gary Trent Jr., and even getting 2 of these archetypes back somehow. Maybe even getting one of these archetypes back on a bit of a bloated contract. You know what I mean? Feel me? And getting one of these players in one of these draft picks, or maybe packaging these draft picks, trading these draft picks for a young player. I don't know. And getting one of these players that way. And then maybe getting the last player type in free agency. It's got to be possible. It's got to be possible. But anyways, however tomorrow goes, we'll have you covered. 2:00, we will be here. But these are my 3 player types. Okay. DeJounte Murray would fit the core. Yes. DeJounte Murray, in theory, could. Yes. I don't think Vision 6'9" is bad. We did not have a big and bench. Fred did not want to play team ball. Sure. Masai is making some bad decisions. Brock Siva saying, Rob, I don't think Gary Trent Jr. is coming back. Is he? I don't know. Malik is not a good defender. I agree. He's not a good defender at all. If we get Malik Monk, we'd be a playoff team. Deron Holmes, Ryan Dunn, Hughes Missy, Isaiah Collier are the best prospects in this draft if you really know ball. Well, sir, I really know ball and I disagree. But I love Hughes Missy, so you got you and I like what I've seen from Deron Holmes as well. So you got me on 2 out of 4. But I'm not really sure if you really understand ball, how you put an Isaiah Collier over guys like Nikola Topic personally. Seeing a lot of Ryan Dunn support here. Xavier Tillman, a nice pickup. Cool. You're literally describing Deron Holmes. I agree. I watched a little bit of tape on him after our live today, and I'm very impressed. I think he has something for sure. Reminds me of Karl Anthony Towns? Wow, okay. No state tax in Florida, cheaper homes, and the Magic are a better team. Quickly to the Magic would be devastating for front office. Um, I think the Orlando Magic are being treated like this bogeyman, and everybody is, like, afraid that they're gonna take their guy or whatever. It's very rare, right? It's very rare. Um, I'd love a player like Herb Jones for defense. Yeah, that would be great. Um, I don't wanna put too much stock into the relationships that exist with the Orlando Magic, but I don't think that the Orlando Magic are about to screw over the Raptors at this point. Jeff Waltman, Masai Ujiri, Bobby Webster, like, these guys operate in the same front office. I do not think they left on bad terms. Um, that's not to say that if it's in their best interest and they believe they can actually get Emmanuel Quickley, that they wouldn't pay for him. But this notion that Emmanuel Quickley is suddenly worth $35 million to Orlando Magic feels absurd to me. Because in that case, if the Raptors don't match, they have massively overpaid for Emmanuel Quickley. Emmanuel Quickley is not worth $35 million. He's a really good player. Um, at 25 million, 26 million, he is not worth north of $30 million in the modern NBA. He hasn't done enough at this point. He was a bench guard, a good one, but a bench guard. Like, you're not paying $30 million for, like, he didn't do what Jalen Brunson did, and Jalen Brunson got like $26 million, bro. Like, let's be real. Um, Tomorrow we get in the first round pick and we getting Alex Sarr. I don't think so. But ironically, Alex Sarr does fit one of my player archetypes that I was talking about. So Walker Kessler. No, not quite, but yeah, I see what you're saying. 1 first and 2 second round pick for Jakob is too much, and what we might trade him this summer. I don't know if we're trading him this summer, and if we are trading him this summer, we might be tanking. Who can be a star player in this draft? I really don't know. I don't know, but I think Topic and Zachary Reese have star stuff. My version of like who can be a star is probably like these guys have star stuff. You know, they look like players before them who have become stars. People want to clown on Goran Dragic all the time. Nikola Topic is considered like a Goran Dragic plus. Well, Goran was a one-time All-Star and a really, really good player for the Slovenian national team. And I think Topic is better. I think he's much better. I watched Goran Dragic play when he was younger. I think Topic is a better player. So, anyways, all of that being said, I think the Raptors need to fill these three archetypes because the way archetypes work, of course, is they unlock other things. We're seeing exactly what having paint protection is doing for Kyrie Irving right now as a point of attack defender. When have you ever in your life seen Kyrie Irving guard as well as he is right now? And again, that's partially on him just buying in and trying very hard, but it's also on the team defenders around him, like Derek Jones and Derek Lively. They've put a competent roster around Luka and Kyrie that fits what they're trying to do. You know, Aaron Gordon, in Denver, perfect fit between, Murray and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm saying like archetypes and fit make all the difference in the world. The Raptors sort of played an entire half season without rim protection, without Jakob Poeltl, with no Christian Koloko. And as good as Kelly Olynyk is, he's not a rim protector. As good as Scotty Barnes is, he's not a center. And as good as Jonte Porter was, and relatively to a two-way slot that he had, he was fantastic. He wasn't that much of a intimidating rim protector either. So at some point, rim deterrence, rim protection, all of this stuff, it's going to matter a lot because everything works on a string in basketball, right? You have rim protection, you can guard up closer. Guys like RJ Barrett, guys like, you're going to get beat in the NBA. If you pressure up, you're going to get big. You're going to get beat. What's behind you is basically what's going to save you. And ultimately, if you continue to get beat, you're going to stop hugging your guys close. Suddenly, you're going to be letting 3-point shooters just get open and start hitting threes. It was a revelation to watch the Dallas Mavericks play like a minute of basketball without Derek Lively today. Just a minute without Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford today, and just to see how quickly things turned against them in terms of paint finishing. And I would love to see the numbers when they are available tomorrow morning on just how poorly the Thunder shot around the basket when Derek Lively was on the court. That level of rim deterrence and rim protection is so important because, and ultimately, I believe that was a big reason why the Raptors wanted to trade up for Evan Mobley when they did, partially because it's the most efficient shot in basketball. A layup or a dunk is the most efficient shot in basketball, no matter how far three-pointers come. Until people start shooting 50% from three or 60% from three, it's never going to be more efficient than, getting to the line 2 times or getting a layup. So yeah, it's really important that you can shut down that area of the floor, and the Raptors haven't done a great job of that for a while. In fact, when they traded for Jakob Poeltl, right before they traded for Jakob Poeltl, I think they were on a historic pace in terms of their defense around the rim. It was a really big part of why they were so bad. Um, Arden saying, "What do you think about Gary's future with the Raptors? Does he have one?" I'm sure he could, you know. And again, the point that I brought up earlier of like when you lack shooting, it's really difficult to just let the guy go for nothing. Maybe you hold on to him as an asset. Maybe you retain him as an asset. I just don't think the people around the league value him the way you do. And again, the price will matter to me. Anything north of $12 to $13 million for Gary Trent Jr., I feel is an overpay. It's my experience watching him play for the last 3-4 years that there are other players in this league who impact winning more than him, who might even be younger than him, who just fit better with what you're trying to do. I understand his relationship with Scotty Barnes is real. There is an element of continuity where you don't want to be moving, you don't want to be changing faces too often for chemistry. And Crip saying never hurts having shooters. Sure, I get that, but the types of shooters matters, right? Gary is he's a self-generating three-point shooter, which is a very, very valuable archetype. It's a very valuable archetype. He doesn't finish well at the rim, and he doesn't create well for others, and he doesn't defend well. So it's a very incomplete archetype, right? Hey, HT, the super chat here. I really appreciate this. Sorry if I missed this previously, but can you explain the case for and against Klingon if we can get him at 6, if we don't have the pick below 5? Yeah, sure I can. So, I don't have a case necessarily against Donovan Klingon other than injury history, right? That would be, you can perceptibly say also like limited upside if you want. The good things about him are present. Obviously, he is a very good rim protector. He's not a great shot blocker, but he's a really smart player. I think he moves well laterally. I think like well enough for a guy his size. I think in transition he could be useful. I think he starts fast breaks really well. He works hard. He works hard and he's very humble. So those are all good things about him. And winning back-to-back national championships, I think can't hurt. That being said, the downside on this, obviously, number one, the injury, and number two, it really does come down to I can't really make a strong case against it. I'm sorry. I don't want to make a strong case against him because there isn't a strong case against him. He is one of the top 6-7 prospects in this team in this draft, which is a very flat draft. And if he is the best player available at 6, I certainly won't be crying. I won't be crying at all. I think he fits something very valuable for the Raptors. I do, however, question long term what his future will be because of how much he overlaps with Jakob Poeltl. A lot of people that I've spoken to compare him to Jakob Poeltl. They say he has a lot of Jakob Poeltl-esque skills. Jakob Poeltl in Utah, not the Jakob Poeltl today, so a little bit more mobility, a little bit more speed. Is there some shooting potential there? We don't know. He took one. He takes a couple. So if there's shooting potential there, like if there's legit shooting potential and you see it in the drills and you believe you can eke out like a mid-range jumper and eventually a 3-point shot out of him, damn, that does change everything, doesn't it? But right now, if you want to make a case against it, it doesn't really influence your spacing in a really positive way. And you already have a lot of spacing question marks right now with Jakob Poeltl on your team. And again, when I say spacing question marks, I don't just mean guys who can't shoot or guys who can shoot. I'm talking about guys who are not respected as shooters. You know what I mean? So we talk about spacing. And I was watching the Boston Celtics today, and I was like, immediately thought to myself, man, their spacing is so much better than it was previous game. And Joe Mazzulla is a really funny coach because a lot of coaches, when their team gets whooped by 30, they talk about, how bad their defense was and their effort and whatever. And Joe Mazzulla always takes the opportunity to talk about how their offensive process didn't click and how their spacing wasn't very good and how their spacing sort of influenced their defense. And I fully agree with him. Joe Mazzulla is like low-key a little bit of a genius. So spacing matters so much because ultimately all of your screens and all of your passes and all of your driving lanes and all of your shots, they're not going to be very effective if you don't have space. As a thought experiment, just as a random thought experiment, imagine we widened the court by 10 feet. Who would benefit and who would suffer, right? That's the point here. So you can't widen the court by 10 feet, but you can widen spacing lanes by a foot each. And that is how, you start to really collapse and put pressure on the defense. When you start talking about like congested paint, um, Jakob Poeltl, right? Like how far can his guy come off of him before he has to worry? I'm guessing like 20 feet. So when Jakob Poeltl sets a pick in the middle of the floor, yeah, it's a solid pick. It's a great pick. He's a great screener. But how his defender guards that screen is so predictable. It will almost always get spammed in the playoffs. This was one of the biggest downsides of trading for Jakob Poeltl to begin with. And so if you extend that thought process out, can Donovan Clingan ever be a part of a team that is great in terms of spacing? Harder for him than it is for someone like a Kyle Filipowski or an Alex Sarr. That would be the case against it. S. Antonio saying Clingan is one of the slowest centers in the draft. A major weakness of his in college was the pick and roll coverages. I don't actually find him that slow personally for a guy his size. I don't think he's that slow at all. Zach Edey's really slow. I don't think Klingan's that slow, bro. I also don't think he guarded the pick and roll really well. But again, that's scheme related too. If Yak could hit threes, he'd be the best bigs in the league. It's a give and take thing. Would he be? Yeah. I mean, like, I get it. But again, like, we make a lot about him not being able to shoot threes or someone being able to shoot threes. Marcus Gasol is a great example that everyone always brings up of a center who could shoot threes. Do you remember how open Marcus Gasol was when he took threes? Like, there was a stat which showed that he was more open than literally any center in the league or any player in the league when he was taking threes. Nobody guarded him. Nobody cared. He took them because it was the right thing to do and because he was daring teams to, like maybe every single game they'd be like, Mark, go out and shoot 2-3 threes and see if it's your night. He wasn't a great 3-point shooter. You have to be a pretty solid 3-point shooter for teams to start respecting you. And I would say that solid starts around 35%. So if you can't knock down 35% of your threes and you're not a high volume guy, they're never going to guard you, right? And so I think to some extent, you do have to put pressure on the defense in order to bend the defense. And I talked about this the other day. It's like the thing that I care about with prospects always is, do you bend the defense or do you not, right? So I think that, with a guy like Donovan Clingan, with a Nikola Topic, like you have concerns, with all of these prospects, you have concerns of how much can you bend the defense. If you're a standstill shooter whose percentages drop the second you put the ball on the court, you're not a super threat to me. You're not that scary. You're not that dynamic. I can hide my worst player on you, like my worst defender. This is the first layer of defense, which is who do I have to guard you with to stop you, right? Like Scotty Barnes, even before he could shoot pretty well, which is like last year, he was doing a lot of good things for the Raptors defense and sorry, spacing because of how his activity level, because of his screen setting, because of how smart he was, how easily he would dive to the court and how physical he was when he got inside and how relentless he was crashing the offensive glass. You couldn't just put anybody on him. You couldn't put your worst defender on him. So immediately you're doing something to bend the defense, right? Um who are we picking at the 19th pick? I would love to say Ease Musi, but I have a feeling he's going to really climb up draft boards, man. So, anyways, the the grander context of spacing, like a guy like Fred VanVleet, how much more he did for your spacing than a guy like Dennis Schroeder. It's as simple as dissect just one play, the pick and roll. You can't go under on Fred. You always have to go over. The minute you have to go over, you're creating a you're creating a completely new opening for your roller. If I can just go under, I can switch everything. If you're a guy who can't dribble the basketball, if you're a guy who can't finish in the paint, like Fred was an incomplete equation, right? Because before, to some extent, he just wasn't a great paint finisher. And it's the same thing with Kyle. So it's like when you start talking about like guys who do it on 3 levels or 4 levels, like 4-level scores, that's who we're talking about. So a guy like a Malik Monk may not be a superstar to you, and that's fine. But he does one thing really well, which is he's like a 3-4 level scorer, which means you can't guard him with your weakest defender. Which means if you are going to put your weakest defender on somebody, it's not going to be him, which means somebody else is going to have an easier night because he's on the court. You see what I mean? It's all a game of trade-offs, right? But with Jakob Poeltl, unless he's crashing the glass and being a menace on the offensive glass, I can pretty much guard him with my worst player every single night. And I know that you're not going to beat me, you know? And that's a problem, right? It's like what the OKC Thunder are going through with Josh Giddey right now. They're guarding him with a center, and he can't do anything about it, right? So now, it's like, gosh, look at what Denver did yesterday with Anthony Edwards, right? They put Anthony Edwards on Jamal Murray, and immediately he got dusted over and over. Why? Is it because he can't stay with Jamal Murray? No, he can stay with Jamal Murray. He can guard Jamal Murray pretty well. Size for size, it's a great matchup. The problem is he doesn't navigate screens very well, and his off-ball awareness is not nearly as sharp as it needs to be at this point. So Jamal Murray is just outthinking him, right? That's pressure that Jamal Murray puts on every single team he faces through his movement. He didn't have to take a single shot. He's just constantly presenting himself in spaces. And so when you look at like what Darko Rajakovic has done for this team in terms of like expanding their basketball knowledge and expanding their basketball IQ and trying to make guys more complete players, what he's trying to do is make them all a little bit more unguardable. He's trying to make them all a little bit more of a threat. What do you do when you take an Emmanuel Quickley and you take a guy who doesn't finish at the paint and just always settles to this floater, and you ban floaters pretty much for like an entire month? They just said, no, we don't want to see floaters when you take it all the way to the basket. Well, now you're creating like that third level of the scoring, right? And what do you do when you take like a Scotty Barnes and you take him from being like everything in the paint or everything in the three, and you start making him like more of a mid-range scorer, a guy who can dribble, pull up two steps into the 2 steps beyond the 3-point line and just boom, boom, or what do you do when, Scotty Barnes suddenly starts spraying threes from above the break? You know what I mean? Like you constantly, at some point, you just overwhelm the defense with too many options, too much thought process, right? And that's really what what teams like Denver and teams like Golden State have won championships on. It doesn't always come down to having 3 superstars or 3 big time stars like the Miami Heat. It doesn't always have to. It can, because what do those stars do? They bend the defense. That's it. Dwayne Wade catches the ball in the ball in the paint, or the ball on the wing against a cross match in transition. You're fucked. You're cooked. You have to put somebody. You have a terrible cross match. You have to send a double, and then boom, Mike Miller's open in the corner, and then boom, Ray Allen is open in the corner. You know how you change all of this? If Dwayne Wade's not Dwayne Wade, if Dwayne Wade is Gary Trent Jr. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So it's not just all about talent. It's about complementing skill sets offensively that bend the defense. So hopefully the Raptors will get some luck today. Today it's 2 a.m. In exactly 12 hours, I'll see you guys back here. Enjoy. Have a great night. Make sure to hit subscribe. And once again, HT963, thanks for the super chat. I really appreciate it, man. Cheers.